everybody, and welcome. We got folks coming in here. I'll be managing that. So if you haven't been in one of our tech talks before, if you haven't seen me, my name is John. I'm a mentor here at Coding Nomads, and I help set up the tech talks for us all. I am very happy here to introduce Efim Shulgin. He is a Coding Nomads alumni. I'm proud to say that he was one of my very first students. He is a Coding Nomad success story. He's currently working as a full stack Java developer. And the goal here today is to find out what his background is, how he got from where he was on his journey to where he is today, how Coding Nomads helped, answer your questions along the way. If you have questions, go ahead and drop them into the chat. We'll be sitting there and we'll break in as we can and answer all of your questions. Until we start seeing some questions, I'm going to turn this over to our esteemed co-founder, Ryan, and let Ryan start the discussion. So take it away, Ryan.
Thank you, John, and thank you everybody for joining. Especially thank you, Efim, for sharing your time with us and your journey. The idea here for this chat will be to just kind of learn from you. So to kind of introduce Efim, and I might get some of this wrong, but Efim, when did you make the decision to switch into a software development career?
Hi everybody. Yes, my name is Efim. So I've always sort of had that in the back of my mind, because like the first time I coded something was back in 5th grade when I was still living in Moscow. I made like a website with my friend, and that we ended up winning like a local competition. But I went to school for music, and then I worked in real estate for a number of years. And I think when COVID hit, like that summer of COVID, so summer of 2020, was when I made the decision that I want to pursue something else. I was still working in real estate at the time, so I would have to do that, outside of my regular job. But that's when I made that decision.
Got it. And so, the really wonderful thing here is, and why we were so interested in interviewing you, is that you just 2 weeks ago accepted your new job as a software developer. Would you mind telling us a bit about that new job of yours?
Yeah, of course. So I'm going to be working as a Java developer at Workday on their adaptive planning team. And I'm going to be working on server-side features and improvements using the Spring framework. So pretty much the same tech stack I was learning at bootcamp. So that's going to be really really lovely for me because I'm very familiar with that tech stack.
Nice. And so with the idea of the folks who are joining us here on this Tech Talk, and whether they're here live today or watching later tomorrow, how long would you say from when you really got started in earnest to when you got that job offer? How much time did that take you?
Well, it wasn't a short path because when I decided that I wanted to break into code, I first bought myself a Python book. It's called Python Crash Course by Eric Mathis. It's great. I highly recommend it. I went through that entire book and got to the project section, did a couple of projects, and then I decided that I really like this and I wanted to join a bootcamp. So originally I joined another bootcamp, not Coding Nomads, which had like a monthly program. Like it was 3 months, but it was broken down into like monthly sections. So I finished the first one and I decided that that was too easy for me. I wanted a challenge, and I wanted to try some, backend code, some Java or Python. And so that's when I found Coding Nomads through SwitchUp. And, I joined Coding Nomads December 2020, right? And, so you can do the math how long it took. But before that, I got my first coding job, I had two simultaneous coding jobs in October. of last year. So I would say, it took me about, 8 months from when I started with Coding Nomads to when I finished, something like that, roughly, because I was also, searching for a job, and I also had to take some time off before, last summer. So yeah, it was I'd say 8 to 9 months is a pretty good, uh, time period.
Nice. That's kind of it's good to hear that, honestly, because that's kind of what we strive for and hope for, right? We always say you should expect a minimum of 6 to 7 months of dedicated technical study, followed by a couple of months to get the job. And that's kind of an ideal fast-paced track. So I'm glad to hear that it was relatively close to that for you. How was that the first time that you got paid to code at that first gig last fall? How and I set this up almost purposefully. Did you feel like you knew everything and that you were 100% ready to be a software engineer and you didn't make any mistakes and everything was perfect? Or how, if that was not the case, how was that first coding job for you?
Well, I definitely wasn't feeling like I know everything. I don't think anybody in this industry feels like that. So I was feeling very confused when I first started working, professionally. I had great mentorship from Coding Nomads and also from Jared, and that really helped me. But I was still being really confused all the time. And I think that those first couple of months, it's normal for somebody just starting out to just be getting set up at a new job, learning the practices of the new job, learning the project, So yeah, the first time I don't even remember when that happened. Like the first time I think it was like $100 the first time I got paid how to code, or to code. But it was a great feeling because all of a sudden I realized that I can do this, and I may not understand everything that's going on, but I was assigned a particular feature to work on, and I made that feature. I tested it, and I it went through the GitHub process, and there it is. Now it's live, and so that's what I got paid for, and that was a great feeling.
Nice. What during your learning journey, obviously it oscillates, but how much time per week, how many hours per week were you regularly dedicating to studying?
It varied, as you said, but I would say that you need like at least like I was trying to dedicate at least 3 to 4 hours per day. Um, and then I would take like a Sunday off, you know. So what is that, like 20, 25 hours a week, something like that?
Yeah, 18 to 24 or something like that.
Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah,
So
nice. And we'll kind of keep coming back to this. And just to reiterate for anybody that's with us, if you have any questions or things that you'd like me to ask Efim or that you'd like to ask Efim, please do feel free to share them in the chat. Um, and we'll come, I'm sure I'll ask the same question in many different forms, but for people who are maybe just now starting that journey that you started a couple of years ago, what is some advice that you can share with them to help them along their way?
sure. Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that the best advice I can give is just study, 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 and practice your code. Also, like what I wish I started doing earlier was studying whiteboard style questions and just data structures and algorithms, because that stuff, it takes a while to grasp, and it would be better if you start early and really take your time to understand data structures and algorithms instead of just cramming it all in because you have a job entry in a couple of
Right.
weeks, like what happened to me.
Yeah.
So also I'd encourage to seek mentorship, and always try to find extra learning material, new exercises. Like if you don't understand the concept of a certain topic, just Google, exercises for, Java generics, and just keep going until you really understand what's going on. And also I'd advise to get inspired. The easiest way to get inspired is just explore all the repos on GitHub, all the things that people have been doing just on their computers, some amazing projects out there, and also on YouTube. There are some really great, coding content creators out there that like really teach you and also inspire you and like show you how everything is possible, in the world of code.
Did you ever have, thank you for sharing that. Did you ever have moments where you thought this wasn't going to work, or where you were losing motivation, or you lost inspiration, or you just went a couple of weeks without making any progress and you had total imposter syndrome, like, what am I doing? This is never going to actually work. Did you ever go through anything like that?
Yes, unfortunately, that's something that happened all the time to me.
Yeah.
Um, I never really went like 2 weeks without coding because I know, Ryan was my mentor and also John, and I know that they wouldn't forgive me, if I
Mhm.
did that. But but I did have a lot of moments when
Yeah.
I just thought, when I just thought like, I'm never gonna make it. Like, who am I? I don't have a bachelor's degree in computer science. Why would anybody hire me? Like I went through all of those stages multiple times. And I can say that really, none of that is really relative. Like, it doesn't really matter where you come from or what your educational background is or how old you are. All that matters is what you bring to the table. If you're a great communicator and problem solver, then you will get the job.
Hmm.
So I
Nice.
think that's really all that matters.
And so, did you have any do you have any personal tools or tricks that you use to get your head back in the game, even though you're fighting all that fear, doubt, and uncertainty?
Yes. So what I used to do is um, I would just try my hand at like a new technology or completely different from what I'm learning currently. So like let's say I was learning Java and I got stuck and like I can't do it anymore. I would just download like Android Studio and make like an Android an Android app by just reading the Android docs. And that would give me inspiration because then I would be like, oh, well, how do I connect this Android app to an API? Because, that's what I was learning at the time. And, I would connect like that app to what I was working on previously. And that's how I would sort of, get back into Java.
I actually remember that about you, working with you, because I'd hop on a call and you'd be like, "Oh, I learned how to do X, Y, Z." I'm like, "What are we doing? We're supposed to be studying Java." And I remember you would very oftentimes be poking around in other technologies, which sometimes I warn against people doing, trying to learn too many things at once or putting their hand in too many pots. But it's great to hear that for you, because you never left the main path forward, which was the get very good at Java and Spring idea. And so it's interesting to learn that going off and kind of playing around with other technologies is kind of what helped keep you in the game when you were tired of it or bored of it, which is a good thing for me to keep in mind as well. Going back to the data structures and algorithms section, so it's a funny thing, because the even though you just had to cram it in before this last round of interviews, I have a sneaking suspicion in a couple of years, when you go on to your next job, you'll find yourself in the same exact scenario where you're like, oh no, it's interview time. I've got to get back into the data structures and algorithms. But what were you asked any of those kinds of, like, what kinds of questions along those lines were you asked in the interviews?
Right. So, like, I don't think I'm allowed to like just like throw the question out there, but
Right.
basically, I was told right before my tech interview, the topic that the question is going to be about, right? I believe it was strings and arrays, right? So like pretty simple. Well, one would think it would be pretty simple, but it wasn't. So like the question I got later, I looked it up on LeetCode, and it was a variation of a question on LeetCode, and that was a medium question. So it was, it wasn't easy. Because like, I don't know about you guys, but the first time I saw some of those easy questions on LeetCode, they were really hard to me. So,
Yeah.
you know, um, but yeah, so like basically, during my tech interviews at Workday, like one was a tech interview round, which was exactly that. It was the whiteboard style interview, but it was all done online. And then there was another round where it was system design. So if I made the mistake of thinking that they weren't going to ask me system design question because I read in a book that those types of questions are only asked if you're applying for a senior developer position. And little did I know, I was asked a system design question. But I was kind of ready for that because I watched some YouTube videos with engineers from Airbnb, I believe, and Facebook, just explaining how they would solve a system design question. And also a big part of applying to those like big tech companies is, and the big difference between startups where I was working before and where I'm going to be working now, is the behavioral interview. So with that, that's not particularly code related, but it's still very much important. Like you need to learn the company values, and you need to be prepared to answer the kind of questions that they're going to ask you. And for that, I recommend a YouTube channel called Self-Made Millennial. That's a very great YouTube channel. If you guys don't know about it, just check it out. It's really great for preparing yourself for a behavioral interview.
And so in that behavioral interview, what kind of, and I know you want to be careful not to just say the exact questions you were asked for, for ethical reasons, among others, but what, like loosely speaking, what kinds of questions were you asked, or how would you recommend somebody else prepare for those same style behavioral and or technical questions? We'll go A and B. A behavioral, B technical.
Yeah, so for the behavioral, what I personally did is I followed the advice that I found on that YouTube channel as well as Google. The kind of questions they ask you, it's all very typical. It's like one of the questions would be, tell me about the time you succeeded at your job, tell me about the time you failed at your job, tell me about your strengths, your weaknesses, right? And so, like, I personally can't just answer those questions off the top of my head. So what I did is I wrote down like 5 different stories from my, work experience working at startups and also working in real estate. And then I would like go through a question list, right? And I would basically, because you want to answer each question with like a short story from your life. You can't just be like, my strength or my weakness is this. Like you can't do that, right? You have to give them a story. It has to be relative.
Right.
So I wrote down a bunch of these stories and just read them before my interview in the morning, like, before bed. I just read them like 5 times. so and so that's how I got prepared, because uh, every question they asked, I was already prepared for by having those stories. In terms of the tech, and that wasn't that hard to prepare for, honestly. It didn't really take me a lot of time. But the tech interview, it did. So I believe I had 3 weeks or something like that, like 2 or 3 weeks before my tech interview to prepare. And I started grinding lead code and HackerRank, basically maybe like 5 or 6 hours a day, just sitting there. I would do that, and I would also do this course on Udemy, like a FANG interview course. There are plenty of those you can find. But also, if I didn't understand a particular problem, I would also go on YouTube and just search for solutions to the problem. And there are some really great, videos out there that really explain how a solution works, right? And there is also a whole process to answering a tech interview question. You can't just be like, they give you a problem and you just sit there and you like solve it and you just give them the answer. It doesn't work that way, right? So like you have to verify your constraints. You have to ask a lot of questions, right? And you have to sort of keep it going like it's a dialogue, like if you were working with an interviewer on a project or on a problem that you're trying to solve. And that's what I found out, in my tech interview. The guy interviewing me was super helpful because I asked those questions and they would sort of lead me in the right direction, because I don't think I even finished the problem. Like I wrote down a solution and it worked, but it wasn't optimal, and so I didn't have time to optimize it. But they were okay with it because ultimately it's really never about you getting the perfect solution because you only have like 45 minutes. It's really all about communicating and like you said, Brian, previously, proving that you're capable of doing something rather than actually doing it within like a
Mhm.
45-minute time span. So
Right.
I'm gonna. I just want to jump in here
Yeah.
and kind of because I've interviewed people in my previous job. For those who don't know, I used to work at Microsoft, and our tech talk from a couple weeks ago was a former colleague of mine who's now a senior developer there, and he was saying the same thing. Your comment about having this conversation with the interviewer and going back and forth and getting input from them and all this, I would in a heartbeat recommend somebody for a hire when they did that with me, because that is showing that they're thinking through the problem. I'm getting an idea of how they think. They know that they don't know everything, and so they're willing to ask questions. They're willing to change their answers. I think that's a great technique to have, and it's a great piece of advice. If you're going in for an interview, realize that it is, kind of overall a conversation between you and the interviewer, but also specifically it's a conversation between you and that interviewer, especially over that problem. And the fact that you were able to get code and it wasn't optimized and everything, but it showed your level of thinking. It showed what you were able to do, and that's eventually what got you in. I think that's a great piece of advice and a great experience to share.
thanks, John. Yeah,
Yeah.
I can't even add anything to that because honestly, it's been such a great learning experience just preparing and going through these interviews. Um,
It always is, and I think that's another thing that doesn't change over time. In my career, every couple of years or few years when I'd be changing jobs, getting back into that interview game, the first one I would always typically bomb or just not do very well in, right? Because you're out of the game, because interviewing is its own art and process that takes a lot of preparation. On that front, did you have any interviews, not necessarily with Workday, but maybe with other companies that you felt did not go well or you didn't get the call back? Did you have any moments like that?
yeah, I had many of those, and so even like during the workday interviews, I was also interviewing for another role at a different company on the East Coast, and I wasn't prepared for that interview.
Hmm.
It wasn't a very technical interview. It was more of like a behavioral tech interview, kind of like a weird mix. Like they would ask me what my debugging process is, for example, and I was just like, I wasn't prepared to answer that question.
Hmm.
I'd just be like, oh well, I turned on the debug. Like
To
that was a
make,
bad,
yeah,
right? That
hit
was
the
a bad
debug
answer,
button. Yeah.
right? So yeah, and also I've interviewed at a few companies here and in the Valley, and yeah, like you said, interviewing is its own art that you just have to get good at. And I think just by interviewing, at different companies, I sort of got that experience that prepared me for like a good interview with Workday.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, I've definitely had some, not so great interviews.
And
Oh,
I think that's,
actually,
go ahead.
uh, now that I remember, my very first interview was with, um, the startup, and during the interview, I I don't know, I don't remember how, but I sort of got into the topic of a merge sort algorithm. And the interviewer was like, "Can you describe me how a merge sort works?" And at that point I realized I don't remember. I don't
Mhm.
remember how a merge sort works. And so I sort of started making it up on the way. But I was lucky because the interviewer wasn't very technical.
Mm.
But I I
Turns
sort
out
of,
the interviewer didn't know how a merge sort worked either.
right. Right. But I realized, Don, if you're going to mention something, like if you're going to mention a sorting algorithm or a data structure, you better know what you're talking about because to an
Right.
interviewer, that's all fair game. Whatever you put in your resume or whatever you say, right? That's all fair game. So, that was a good lesson to learn.
That's something I always mention to people too. If it's on your resume, you should be prepared to speak to it competently, right? And resumes are a tricky thing because it's not a place to be humble, but you can't boast too much. So you've got to walk this fine line between putting everything on there that you think you can speak competently to, and but it's you want to put as much on there as possible that demonstrates your value. So it's like this, you've got to kind of thread this line. um After those interviews that you did not do so well on, I'm assuming those were probably followed by some down moments, maybe where you were doubting yourself, or again, fear, doubt, and uncertainty. Did you How did you get yourself back in the game after having those less than stellar interviews, or how did you handle that?
So with interviewing, I never really felt down because I sort of the whole job search and the job search and the interview, I just sort of approached it like a sport. So to me, it wouldn't be like a downfall. It would just be more of like, let me let's find more interviews and
Mhm.
let's do them. And that's funny because I never for Workday, I was contacted by an internal recruiter at Workday to, to start the process. So I never actually seeked that interview, but it ended up being with the company that I'm going to be working for. So sometimes those things happen. Um, so yeah, I never really had any downfall. The only thing I can say is what's kind of annoying is when a company is not going to interview you just because of your lack of experience,
Mhm.
or like they're not even going to give you a chance. Now that's pretty annoying to me, right? Like, and they would talk to you, right? In the beginning, they would be like, they would do a meet and greet, and everything would seem like it's well, and then the hiring manager or somebody or a manager or like a senior dev would be like, "Oh, this person isn't experienced enough. We're looking for somebody with more experience, so we're not even going to give him a chance." Which to me is ridiculous because fan companies out there are interviewing people with little to no experience, but this
Mhm.
small company is not going to do that, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but that's like the only downfall I would have is just being frustrated that they wouldn't even give me a chance. So
Yeah, that that can that can definitely be the case. And fortunately, a lot of companies these days are coming around to understand that it's about finding the right people, right? Because in a piece of advice that I would give, and I've given you this advice when you were preparing it, people want to hire people that will help them do a better job, right? And there's a skill and an attitude that you can't really teach somebody, right? But if they have it, you can detect it. And it's the kind of people that you want to work with, right? Because some people are going to either be overly confident in their skills and be like, nope, that's the way it's done, that's the only way to do it, and that's going to just lead to problems, right? And then there's going to be other people that are too wishy-washy, or totally unsure of themselves, or totally unsure of how to do anything, which is also going to be difficult. And oftentimes what companies are looking for, and I know what I've always looked for in people I've interviewed, whether it be at former programming roles or here at Coding Nomads, is that we're looking for people that um, will help us do a better job as a business, will make my job easier, right? And so in the interview, what I'm always telling people, and I remember having this conversation with you, is remember what the end goal is here for them, right? They're looking for somebody that's got a good attitude, that's pleasant, that's easy to work, that will be easy to work with, and will help them succeed and help them do a better job. And that's not, you don't, the way to do that is not necessarily just to memorize as much as humanly possible and be able to repeat some answer out of memory. It's about having a conversation with them, to digress on that topic, where you demonstrate your ability to get to a solution over time, ideally with a pleasant attitude. And I know the attitude part, it could be somewhat controversial, but it's true. People want to work with people that aren't a total pain and that don't like really stress them out, right? They want to have a pleasant work environment with intelligent people that are going to help them get to solutions, right? And keeping that goal in mind is really, really helpful as, you know, and I've used this for myself in my own interviews. And when I'm interviewing people, is this somebody who's going to make my job easier and make us more successful, or is this somebody that's going to make my job harder and, you know, require a bunch of my time away from the stuff I already need to do? So how about I should also thank you, because you did such a good job at your Workday interviews that recruiter then reached out to me and said, hey, do you have any more alumni that we can chat to? We did introduce some more people to them. And since you got hired, another Coding Nomads alumnus has also been hired at Workday, which is great. So thank you for leading the way there and making Coding Nomads look good.
Oh, no, I will always try to do my best to do that because honestly, I think that Coding Nomads, it's one of those boot camp. There are not a lot of boot camps out there that really prepare somebody for like an entry level tech job, and that's something I'll always be grateful for.
Well, you're very welcome. You know, on our side, it's one thing that's always been evident in working with you, because I've had the pleasure of working with you, and I know you've worked with several different Coding Nomads mentors, is that it's always been very, very obvious that you're very motivated and driven, and that it's not a matter of if you're going to do this, but a matter of when you'll get that first job. And that's a piece of advice that I share with a lot of people, especially people who are just getting started and they're not sure if it's for them, you know. And there's a lot of ways to start lightly, just by, you know, getting into some material, getting into some free or cheap courses or tutorials and YouTube videos, and kind of starting to poke around. But that there's a very common attitude that I see in people that go through, for instance, our program and get jobs. And it's just this, and you possess it, which is just this determination of, it's not if, it's when, right? It's not if I'm going to succeed at this, it's when I'm going to succeed at this, or I'm already succeeding at this. And that idea that you said, you know, it's like a game, let's just get more interviews, right? I love that, because a lot of people will bomb that first interview, and it's difficult to recover from for a lot of people, right? They've put in 8 months, 9 months of really hard work, and they finally got that interview after reaching out to 20 different companies, and they get in that interview that they prepared so hard for, and just boom, fall flat on their face. And it happens to everyone, right? It's part of the process. And that I like the way that you kind of gamified it in your head, like, all right, let's find another one, let's get some practice, this is, you know. And so as advice to other people who are watching this is that mindset of course, there's going to be fear, doubt, and uncertainty. Efim mentioned that he has faced it the entire way. We all are going to have that, right? But if you just kind of do your best, and we can't be perfect all the time, but do your best to maintain this kind of attitude of, I'm going to put in the time, I'm going to put in the work, and I'm going to get there, right? And if you continue to do that, like if you mentioned 3 to 4 hours a day, most days of the week, and you know, after let's say 8 to 12 months, right, you got there, you got to the point where you could get an interview, and you could convince an interviewer that you are one of those people that can help them do a better job at their job. So you know, nice work, way to show us how it's done. There's a few questions in the chat that I wanted
Sure.
to come to. So well, at least a few comments, people laughing about leak code, easy questions not being easy. And another person,
so there was one,
go ahead,
so
John.
there was one question about whether or not you needed to have a computer science degree in order to get a job, and there were some answers here. I put one up, and we had someone else in the chat put an answer up there. So Efim, I don't know, you don't have a computer science degree at this point, right?
No, I don't. I mean, I'm planning on getting one eventually. But like I said, I went to college for music. So I don't have, that's very different from a computer science degree.
Okay. And then someone else was asking actually about the best language to focus on for a full stack web developer. And I couldn't answer it because I've never done full stack web development. I have no idea. So So for you, you went through the Java course, and that's what you're doing now, right?
Yeah, I think that's a very like highly opinionated topic. I would always stick with Java and say Java is the best tech stack. Like Spring, and then on the front end you could have just pick one like React, Vue, or Angular. Um, but there are a lot of people out there that would tell you otherwise. Some people will tell you that JavaScript is the way to go. Node is the way to go. Some people will tell you Django or Flask is the way to go. And honestly, I think in the end of the day, it doesn't really make a difference. As long as you know the stack well and you know how to implement it well in different scenarios, then any framework will do well, right? Because like I've had to learn some Django and Flask for my previous jobs, and I found the concepts in those frameworks to be very similar to what you find in Spring. Because ultimately, all these frameworks they're all trying to solve the same issues. So I recommend Java because Java is I feel like a lot of times it's safer, and also because of the intensity of Java and how verbose it is, it sort of gives you a preview of like the more old school languages like C++ plus plus or something. And now, like when I look at C++ plus plus code, it's not that intimidating, which is great. But if I was just coding Python all the time, C++ plus plus would seem intimidating. So
Okay. Yeah, that's
And
good. Um, interesting that you say, that, knowing one framework lets you on to, gives you the ability to look at something like Django or Flask and understand what the concepts are there and then move on. It's kind of the same thing with a language. Once you learn the basics of programming, and I know there's lots of folks who come up through high school, at least here in the States, they're coming up through high school and they're learning how to do things in block languages like Snap or Scratch or something like that, and they're learning the concepts, and then those are actually very applicable to learning a text-based language like Java or Python, which then sets them up to learn other languages. Once you have the concepts down, I think it's easier to move from one framework to another or one language to another. So that's good insight. Thank you. Appreciate it.
of course.
I was actually at I had the good fortune of going to the Python conference last week in Salt Lake City. And I can see Martin, I think, is on here as well. It was great to hang out with Martin there. And I went to this, I went to this great talk. It was a talk about education. And they said something which was really helped something click for me, which is that when someone's learning a foreign language, yeah, let's say, for me, I'd spent a lot of time studying Spanish. With each word I learned in Spanish, there was a reference point in English that I could compare it to, right? Hola means hello, and hello being a word that I already know intrinsically, and all these English words I already know intrinsically. So with each new Spanish word, I could tie that to an English word, right? Or a phrase. With programming, the first language you learn and the first framework you learn, there is no corollary understanding in our brains that we can tie it to, right? It's the first time that we understand that we're wrapping our heads around this concept. It can be entirely new. And what's neat, though, and to this point that we're discussing, is that as soon as you start learning your second language, your second programming language or your second framework, all of a sudden you do have that thing that you can tie it to. So, like in Django or Flask, you've got this idea of routes, right? Which is the same exact thing as get mapping, put mapping, post mapping in Spring. So the moment you see routes in Python or Django or Flask, you're like, oh, that's just, okay, this is the same thing. And instead of requiring 2 or 3 days to wrap your mind around it like it did the first time, it requires, 10 minutes to run through it. And it's a neat thing when you get to that point where you can start picking up these frameworks relatively easily. And to digress on to the question, which is, what's the best tech stack? Efim was totally correct in saying that this is a hotly debated topic. For me, it's kind of like saying, what's the best car to drive across the country in, right? There's a lot of different cars that you could use. There's a lot of different people that are going to believe that this car is better than that car. all of these it might get a little different, which car is the best for off-roading, or which car is the best for gas mileage, or which car is the best. When you start to get into more specific scenarios, then particular cars, as an analogy, might start to surface as being a bit better. At the end of the day, for web development, what you're going to want is typically there's a few different ways to do web development. A very common MERN, mean, Mevin is quite popular these days, which is true. But what you're typically going to be looking at is some kind of server side, which very oftentimes is Java or Python, and that server side is going to be oftentimes a REST API, and it's just kind of a service that sits there waiting and listening for incoming requests to get particular data. For instance, give me a list of all users, or give me a list of all transactions, or whatever it might be. Give me whatever data I need, right? And then the front end, which is the JavaScript, which is, as Efim mentioned, pick one, React, Angular, Vue, Svelte is one that we've been using internally for a little bit. The JavaScript will essentially, based on what the user does, let's say the user clicks on, a button that says show all users or show all transactions, then the JavaScript will make a request back to the server-side API. The server-side API will process that request, get some data out of the database, return that data to the front end, typically as JSON, and then the JavaScript will parse that JSON and populate the page, populate the HTML with it. That's one very common paradigm for web development. The other is called MVC, Model View Controller, which is essentially where the server-side application kind of does most of the rendering of the page that you're going to see. It actually does it populates the HTML on the server side and essentially just sends that HTML back to the browser to display. They're both very common, and every modern server-side programming language has frameworks to support both of them, right? So in Java, Spring supports the idea of creating REST APIs as well as creating MVC, Model View Controller applications. Python does the same thing with Django and Flask. PHP does the same thing. .NET, I don't know. I mean, I know C#. I don't know what web frameworks exist for C++, but essentially every server-side language has frameworks, like Efim mentioned, solving this same problem, which is how do we do this communication from the front end to the back end to create web applications. And then on the front end, it's HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, right? HTML saying I want a box on the screen, CSS saying I want that box to be blue, and JavaScript saying when somebody clicks on this box, I want it to turn red, right? Adding some behavior. And that typically doesn't change. For somebody who's just getting started, I would recommend either Java and Spring or Python and Django or Flask. They're extremely common, widely used, and they they do essentially the same thing and will bring you up to speed on all those topics that I just mentioned. So hopefully that helps answer that question.
Yeah, and also I wanted to add something to that. A lot of times, what will happen is you will have to travel between technologies. Like let's say you were learning Java at bootcamp, but then you're applying to all these different jobs, and let's say this job wants you to to code in Node. There is nothing. It happens all the time, right? Like you just learn Node and get started with it, and in a few weeks you're coding in Node. Because you can already transfer those skills from Java to a different framework.
And we've seen that a lot with our own grads here at CodingNomads. Where they'll go through our Python track and get a job as a Java developer. They'll go through our Java track and get a job as a Python developer, or beyond, right? I'm just using Java and Python, but that transferableness is because a language, again, if you do a good job in the interview of convincing the person you're talking to that you're just generally capable of learning complex topics and applying that knowledge, if you can demonstrate that, then you can pick up a new language, in a few weeks. The other CodingNomad alumni who just got hired at Workday as well, he got hired on a different team where he'll be using they have a proprietary internal developed language that they use, and he'll be using that. He's never seen it before in his life, and they just hired him to that team, knowing that based on his performance in the interview, he'll be able to pick up this language and the tools that they're using in pretty short order. Knowing that most companies know that it's going to take a few weeks to get somebody up to speed and productive. There's another question here, which is, why is the industry asking for React, Angular, Vue.js for front-end developer jobs, knowledge for entry roles? So generally speaking, a front-end developer in my mind would be somebody that works with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript primarily. React, Angular, Vue, and a few of the other frameworks are, by far the most popular. I would say React is leading the the way these days. So if in an ideal world, you can be a bit comfortable with the way the entire stack works, right? Which is understanding your Java and or Python server side and whatever framework you might be using, whether it be Spring, Django, Flask, as well as understanding how JavaScript works on the front end and poking around with some of those frameworks that we've mentioned here. Do you have any other thoughts on that topic, Efim?
Yeah, I think that, for a front-end job, you're definitely going to want these skills. And the front-end interviewing process is also more of like a, like I think that for server-side roles or, non-front-end roles, usually the questions are very generic and you can like pick your own language and sort of solve the problem whichever language you want. But for front-end interviews, from what I've heard, I've never had to go through one, but from what I've heard is, they would actually give you like it would be a React interview, and you'd be expected to know how to write React code, you know, for a certain feature that they want in an interview.
Yeah. So tell us a bit more, if you don't mind, about the interview process that you just went through from beginning to end successfully. What did that interview process look like? You said you initially got contacted by a recruiter, and then what happened?
Yeah. So not just one recruiter. I've something happened. Like, so I was working at this startup, and after the 6 month mark hit on my LinkedIn, and by the way, LinkedIn is super important. If you guys don't have one, uh, you should definitely get started on that. But after the 6 months hit, all these recruiters started contacting. I don't know, it's like an algorithm or something within
Mm.
LinkedIn. Um, and I even had a recruiter from Amazon contact me. Like it was amazing. And so eventually, Workday also contacted me, right? And then we set up like a meet and greet, where I just talked about my experience and my goals. And I always try to keep it relative, so like in the tech interviews, I never really talked about like my life or my preferences in literature. Like I always try to keep it relative to the role, which I would also recommend. Um, but so there was a meet and greet, and then the other, the next step was the tech interview, I believe. Yes, it was the tech interview right away. And they told me, they told me to pick a date, right? And there was like a 2 week span. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, I need to pick the latest date because I will have more leverage, more time to prepare, right? But they ended up not letting me pick the latest date, and I was stuck in like the middle of that. I was like, okay, fine, we'll do that. So I had that tech interview, and then right away, like that very same day, they told me, okay, go on to the next stage, right? And I think during that day, I also had another interview at another company, which was also like kind of tech. So it was like a crazy time. So I was like, okay, and so then I went to the next interview, which was split, and it was partially behavioral for maybe like 30 minutes, and then another like half hour was system design. And so after that, so I think that's what, three interviews, right? Meet and greet, tech, and system design, behavioral. Yeah. So, and after that, I got the offer, like after some time, and so that was how it went. Um, the one that requires the most work, in my opinion, is going to be the tech interview. But I know that, for example, Brandon, who is also a Coding Nomads alumnus, he went through the Workday interview process, but it was very different for him, because because of the fact that he's going to be working in a team that codes in Workday's proprietary language, right? So, like Ryan and I, we talked to Brandon and we realized that his interview process is very different. But generally, like the big tech interview process is generally going to have a tech round, right? It's going to have a behavioral round, system design. And then bigger companies, like I was talking to this recruiter from Amazon, what they will have is they will have you do one tech round, like an assignment. Then they would have you do a live tech round, and then you get like a day where you have 5 other rounds, which would be tech, behavioral, system design. So that's usually how it goes at these companies. At startups is different. I think it can be the Wild West at startups, but
So when you speak to system design, and one quick interjection here, I'm gonna put we've been speaking about LinkedIn. I'm gonna put my LinkedIn link in the chat here, because Shubham
that's a great idea.
just said pointed out that it can be a bit tricky to get those first connections or to start building your network on LinkedIn. So I'm going to share my LinkedIn, and please feel free to connect with me, and I will accept that invitation. And anybody else that would like to connect, feel free to share your LinkedIn link in the chat here. And then, so when you talk about system design, oh, that's a direct message. Let me send it to everybody. There we go. To whatever extent you're comfortable, what did those system design questions look like? Because everyone understands like the data structures, algorithms. Here's some wordplay whiteboard problem for you to figure out. But what is the system design question? What do the system design questions look like?
So I feel like the system design questions are actually a lot more fun than the whiteboard stuff, because they're like more real. Like you would actually like encounter something like that in real life. But basically, like an example of a system design question, well, a classical one is design a parking garage, right? Like, how would you design an application that accepts reservations for a parking garage, right? And then it could be variations of that, design a International Space Station docking system API, and so what those questions I feel like they're really asking is your experience with the sort of tech stack you would use, the sort of endpoints you would have, you thinking out loud about the project and how it's all going to be put together. And also, those questions, as you sort of start talking about the design of the system that you're designing, you're going to be asked about scalability. And you should always be asking questions about scalability. How many users are we expecting? And you should always try to keep it going as a conversation again. So like, for example, a great thing that really helped me was when I was designing something, I would be like, I started from the back end because I just consider myself more of like a back end developer. And I would be asking questions like, you know, um, how secure do you want this application to be, right? What features do you want? What sort of do you want guest users to have privileges, or do you always want to register everybody? And even if I would like make a system design decision, but I wasn't particularly fond of it, I would ask the engineer, "Do you think this is a good way to do this?" And they would answer you. They would answer you, "Yep, that's a pretty good way," or maybe I would implement this instead. So I feel like those system design questions are actually really great, and I never expected I would get one, but it ended up happening, and that's great. So I really the way I prepared for that is, well, I had a lot of experience previously, working at startups, just seeing how things function there. And then I would watch these YouTube videos where these like top engineers from these big companies answer these questions on a call like this, right? And they would explain how they would design something. And I learned from that as well.
Mhm.
So
Thank you for sharing that. And I want to commend you again on one thing that I see over and over again with you and your attitude and the way that you've done this was to use all available resources, right? You're in multiple courses, you're in CodingNomads mentorship program, you're all over YouTube, you've read a variety of books, you've essentially attacked this in a 360-degree manner using all available resources at your disposal, which I applaud and I recommend to anybody watching this. Right, no single we do our personal best here at CodingNomads. We're very proud of our curriculum, and we have a very strong mentorship program. We're always around to help and answer questions. But when we get asked questions by our students, half the time what we're doing is going and doing research using all available resources to answer that question, right? So in the software development realm specifically, there's other realms where it really does need to be, you can't, if you're in the middle of brain surgery, you probably shouldn't be Googling what does that nerve do or something. But in software development, you can, leverage all available resources, forums, any communities that you're a part of. And, just to give a shout out to, for instance, CodingNomads forum is that, questions like scalability or system design or somebody who has no professional experience, like how are they supposed to know how to build a scalable, redundant system, right? One of the ways that you know that or learn that is by having a community of peers that you can ask, right? So one place that obviously I'm biased, but CodingNomads forum, which is available to anybody that's subscribed to any of our courses in any way ever, is a great place where you could just ask a question. Like, I have no idea what it means to deploy something in a scalable way. Like, what can somebody help me with that? And you'll probably get, half a dozen answers of different people that have done, scalable deployments in different ways. So we can, fortunately, the software development community is really oftentimes keen and open to sharing their knowledge and skills with other people who are just getting started. There can be some places that are a little more aggressive, right? Sometimes you'll find some people that on some forums that are a little bit, tough. I would recommend, especially for the people that are getting started, find a place where you're not intimidated to ask questions, and then ask a lot of them. Right. CodingNomads is a great place for that. There are others out there, but it's in asking those questions, just like in the interview. The same thing is true in the learning process. I can kind of see when the people that I'm working with in a mentor relationship, the people that are asking tons of questions and reaching out to me every day with some bug or some confusion or whatever, I can just feel like this person's going to be successful, right? It might seem opposite because they're so confused, they have so many questions, that maybe that's a bad thing, but in actuality that's a really good thing. So I know we're just about out of time here, and I wanted to open up the floor. Are there any other questions that anybody on the call here has for Efim?
Oh, and I see the message from Scott. Thanks so much, Scott. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, we'll have to pass that on to Scott in Slack or in the forum, because I think Scott had to drop off. But in absentia, you're welcome. So
yeah.
I just wanted to kind of reiterate something that you were just saying, Ryan. I before this meeting, I had I was on with another student who was also kind of wondering. We were working through some problems, and he was looking through some of the example code and wondering, okay, so this looks like the example code, this looks like something I want to use. And then he'd go back to his code and he'd start typing it in, and I sit there and look at him. I said, why don't you just copy it? Just copy and paste it in. And he said, you can do that? That seems like cheating. I'm like, no, go copy paste the code. I mean, it's there, it's working. That's not cheating. What the bad thing is if you copy and paste the code, or you take somebody else's idea on board and you don't understand it, and then you just say, oh, I'm just going to run with it. That's a problem, because now you have no idea what that's doing. So if you understand the code, by all means, take the code, take whatever answers that you get, make them your own, but don't sit there and think you got to type it in from scratch all the time. My word,
Right.
if that was the case, Stack Overflow would not exist. There'd
Right.
be no Stack Overflow. So
yeah.
But speaking of, you were talking about asking questions and finding nice places to ask questions. Stack Overflow is not the place. So.
Right. I mean, I've learned so much from Stack Overflow, but I am still, after 15 years in the industry, hesitant to post questions on there because I just don't know what kind of ire it's gonna inspire.
Yeah.
But I got one. It's a direct message. I think it came just to me, but from Shubham, mentioning that people, there's so many resources out there that it's confusing and overwhelming, essentially, is what I'm gathering from the question. And my recommendation for that, without a doubt, I completely agree. One of the reasons we exist as a company, Coding Nomads and so many others like us, is to help guide people through all that chaos and confusion and noise. And so Shubham and anybody else who's listening, if you're kind of in that position where you don't know where to start or what to do, or there's too many resources, too much stuff, pick one course and finish that course all the way through. So if you're interested in Python, go to the Python 101 course, for instance, in Coding Nomads platform, start that course and then do Python 201 and then do Python 301. And by the time you finish that series, or in the case of Java, we have it all in one course, which is just called Java programming. By the time you actually finish that course, a lot of that confusion about so much noise will be quieted. And then at that point, if you're not quite sure what the next step is, right, feel free to reach out to us. But if it's Java, I would without a doubt say move into the Spring course, because that's where you learn how to build kind of production grade, professional level Java applications, that akin and similar or exactly like what you'll be getting paid to develop at a job. For instance, Efim is going to be using Java and Spring at his new job. If you're studying Python, then I would recommend, a great place to start is in the web frameworks. So once you've been through Python 101, 201, 301, for instance, on our platform, then do the Django or Flask course. And it's easy to think there's so much out there. I've kind of got to learn everything and have your hand in every pot. There's this new thing. Don't worry about all the shiny objects. Don't worry about every single framework. Pick one language and stick with it for several months and get really good at that language. And then when you're ready for a next step, if you're not sure what that is, reach out and we'll show you, or we'll point you in the right direction, because there's so many resources. You're absolutely right. It can be overwhelming. Are there any other questions or comments or anything that people would like to ask Efim while we have him? Nice. Looks like we've done such a good job that we've quelled everyone's concerns and fears about the journey and the interview process. And before I turn it back over to you, John, I want to just thank you again, Efim, for sharing your time and your journey. It's been a pleasure working with you over the last year, and I'm really just so happy for you and proud of your progress and achievements, and excited for you to start that new job. And thank you for taking the time to share with us and help others along their path who are following just behind you. So thank you again.
Oh, no, thanks. Thank you, Ryan. And the last thing I want to say is that, you said something that I disagree with, is that, you said Coding Nomads and other companies like us. Well, there is nobody else like Coding Nomads. I guarantee you that. I think there is so many resources out there, right? You can learn from those resources, and those are great. But the real idea to me behind Coding Nomads is the fact that that you guys really mentor people and sort of help actually land a job, right? Not just help somebody learn how to code, because there are many ways somebody can do that, but helping somebody to actually get to a stage where they will have the resources and the connections to have real world experience, that's invaluable, and I think that's why it's so important, as you're doing the career switch, or breaking into code, is to pick the right boot camp. And I was just really lucky to find you guys, so thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Efim. Really enjoyable talk, and it has been my distinct pleasure to have joined you on this journey as well. And glad that you were able to come and talk to all of our folks. In 2 weeks' time, we've got another Coding Nomads alum who is going to be joining us, Sam Miller. He'll be talking about his progress through Coding Nomads and how he got into data science and machine learning. So if you're interested in the more data science and machine learning side of things, that's going to be a talk that you're going to want to come to. We'll have the recording of this talk up on YouTube relatively shortly, hopefully by tomorrow. Until then, we're here on Slack, we're here in the forums, and we'll see you in a couple weeks. Thanks everybody for coming.
Yep. Thank you guys. Thank you.
Thanks,
Take
guys.
care.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Efim. Thank you, John.
Yep.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please let us know by liking and subscribing. If there's another topic that you'd like to learn more about, leave us a comment. We would love to hear from you. And if you want to become a coding pro, visit our website at codingnomads.co. See you next time.